September 2010, and a crowd gathers on a remote hillside in Sussex to pay their respects to Indian war heroes. Incredibly, more Indians volunteered to fight for Britain in the First World War than all the Scots, Welsh and Irish combined. And of that number, up to a third of the soldiers were Sikhs, despite making up just a fragment of India's population. This is the little-known story of the Sikhs, who answered Britain's plea for help in 2 world wars. They helped save Britain from Nazi tyranny.
We wanted to fight against Hitler because we wanted democracy.
And laid down their own lives for this country's freedom. During the 18th century, Sikh armies proved their fighting power with key victories and conquests in their native Punjab. But a new foe emerged in the mid-19th century as the British Empire extended east.
The Sikhs had always been soldiers. They'd had to be soldiers because to survive, they had to fight to survive. If they didn't defend their way of life, it would disappear. The British in 1848, after the Sikh Wars, like many of our best soldiers, we start off by going to war with them. And then the war finishes and both sides reckon that actually the other side is really quite good chaps after all. The British view was it was much better to have the Sikhs on our side than fighting against us. And so it was only a short step to the British saying, look, we've been enemies in the past, but actually there's more between us than divides us. Come and work for us.
With the Punjab annexed, the British harnessed the Sikh army's power to strengthen its hold across India, aided by an anthropological approach to managing differences among their Indian subjects, the martial race theory. By the early 20th century, the Sikhs' homeland, Punjab, was providing over half the troops used in the British Indian Army, despite Sikhs making up just 1% of the country's population. And with the onset of the First World War, Britain found it had a useful new source of war conscripts.
British Army went across to France in 1914. It took a huge number of casualties. The only army that could reinforce it, the only army that was almost as big as the British Army and was regular and properly trained and experienced, was the British Indian Army. And very, very early, as early as September 1914, Indian troops were moving from India by sea over to France, coming up and taking their place in the line on the Western Front.
For many Sikhs, bravery on the battlefield was in itself an honourable act. Sikh soldiers were deployed in the harsh European trenches, like Jairmal Singh Johal's grandfather, Manta Singh.
This is my grandfather, Subhadar Manta Singh, and next to him is Captain Henderson. His senior officer, Captain Henderson, got wounded and he went to save him. And while he was bringing him back in a wheelbarrow, he got shot in his leg. And he was brought to hospital in Brighton.
Over 4,000 injured Indian soldiers were brought to the Royal Pavilion, and many were surprised by the opulence of their new surroundings.
Certainly the letters we have from the Indian soldiers themselves indicate that they were very, very honoured by the fact that they were given space to actually recuperate in a royal palace as they saw it, which was also augmented by the fact that King George V made 2 visits here in January and August 1915.
The care the Sikh soldiers received in Brighton led to a strong sense of personal duty to King George V. In a letter home, one Sikh soldier wrote, "May God grant long life to the generous-hearted sovereign who has deigned to think of his humblest soldiers." As a thank you for the manner in which the injured troops were looked after, a new gateway to the Royal Pavilion was donated by a Sikh Maharaja on behalf of the Indian people. But for Manta Singh, there would be no recovery at the hospital and no return to his homeland. Saving the life of his captain led to the tragic loss of his own in 1915.
The outcome of the First World War, the early stages of it, certainly without the Indian Army contribution, and of course Sikhs were a large part of that contribution, I think the war might have been very, very different. The Indian Army contingents arrived during the First Battle of Ypres, just in time and in just enough numbers to block the gaps. They certainly saved the British from what might have been an embarrassing retreat back to the Channel ports. The Sikh contribution to the Second World War was exceedingly important. They probably formed about a quarter of the combat units of the Indian Army. So that they were in tanks, there were infantry, there was Sikh artillery, so huge contribution.
Britain sent out a plea for foreign pilots to help defend the country from the threat of Nazi invasion, and Indian fighter pilots were among those who flew to the rescue. One of the first to sign up was a young Sikh moved by the plight of the British people.
I took part in the operations against the Germans in Europe. England was alone in 1940, and we had hardly any defense. So that was the time when I started feeling that we have to sort of fight for survival, and that was the reason that I continued to fight for the next 4 or 5 years.
Booji soon found that the combination of a turban and RAF wings made him a popular figure in wartime London. Despite suffering serious head injuries, Booji was back in the pilot's seat and protecting Britain from Nazi attack just weeks after the crash.
The Battle of Britain was won, but not by Hitler.
Booji survived being shot down 3 more times, and by the end of the war he'd risen to squadron leader and was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross Medal for his heroics in the air.
Without the Indian Army, Italy would have been very difficult. Without the Indian Army, the Burma campaign could not have been fought, or if it had fought, we would have lost. No Indian Army, no Far East campaign.
For many of the Sikh soldiers, it was their faith that helped sustain them through difficulties on the battlefield. In the decades after the war, the British Army's ranks benefited from Punjabi immigration into Britain, and today the Sikh military tradition continues to flourish on British soil. Last year, 2 young Sikhs were selected to guard the Queen.
The Sikh tradition with the British Army goes back a long way, and we live in Great Britain, therefore we are proud to represent in the forces.
Just 1 week later, at the Shatri Monument in Sussex, a new memorial was unveiled listing the names of each of the Indian soldiers who were cremated there during the First World War.